We disagree on where we'd like to see the first base on the moon, but I've agreed to say, okay, it's going to be at the South Pole, and we're going to talk about how we would do it, and we're going to try to collaborate.
You're not going to use that command.
No, you can unplug it.
It's making a noise here that you don't need.
If I had more time, I'd have prepared some things for it, but I didn't, so we just put it on.
I was actually thinking I would have something. One of you and I sit down over here.
Sure.
Actually, I thought I was going to have something for you. The Explorers Club has taken an article from me on the space land grant legislation, and they hired Brian Sullivan, who's a terrific space artist, to illustrate it. And he has actually built a model of a South Pole base according to my descriptions of it with him. And I was hoping I'd have some of his material to bring. And he kept saying, I need a few more days. I need a few more days. So it will appear in the Explorers Club Journal, but I haven't got anything to show. So I apologize.
I think we should back up a bit and say how this came about. Lunar Prospector has confirmed that there's water ice at the South Pole, and that there's apparently even more at the North Pole. But this discussion actually goes back 4 years to when the Clementine mission, using quite different instruments, detected radar reflections, which it seemed that the logical explanation was that they were seeing water ice. Lunar Prospector was looking for signature of hydrogen. They were looking for suggestive reflections. And they found it at the South Pole. And at the same time, they were doing photographic mapping of the entire lunar globe. And they found one crest of a crater at the South Pole, which, let me back up. The moon's axis is tilted only 1.5 degrees. Earth's is 24 degrees. Since it's tilted and not tilted too much, theoretically at the pole, the sun is always above the horizon or on the horizon at a different angle all the time. Actually, since it's 1.5 degrees, if you had a perfectly spherical globe at the pole, you would have to be 2,000 feet up before the sun would be above the horizon all month long. Well, they have found that this crater rim, some part of this crater rim, is in sunlight a total of 85% of the time. Now, while this is important because everywhere else on the moon, you have 14 plus days of light followed by 14 plus days of darkness. And that's a problem if you're getting your power from solar power. Everybody says, well, just bring the nuke along. But the way things are going with the protests from Cassini and Galileo, we may quickly be in a situation where we're not allowed, it might be okay to bring up a nuclear plant, but without the fuel. Nobody wants to allow us to bring anything nuclear.
And why should you when you've got the sunlight unlimited?
Right.
Actually, in my case, it goes back even further. This is from October 1990's Ad Astra, which is before Clementine.
Right.
It actually came about because I was still, even then I was proposing land grants, and one of the arguments I was getting for land grants was, why would anybody want a land grant on the moon? It's all the same. There's no such thing as valuable property. Any piece of the moon is worth the same as any other piece. That argument hasn't been an issue lately, but at that point it was one of the first things I ran into. And I went to a place called Rovaniemi in Finland, which is in the land of the midnight sun. And it suddenly dawned on me that, in fact, there was a place that was better and more valuable than anywhere else on the moon, because you wouldn't have this problem. There's a picture, it's a little hard to see, but it's taken up there where for 24 hours you see the sun. I mean, each of these sections, if you can see it, is at 1 hour. And for 24 hours, the sun rotates around the horizon, and it never quite sets. Now, in the poles of the Earth, it's cold because the sunlight is attenuated by the atmosphere coming in on an angle to get up to the poles. But on the moon, there is no atmosphere. So the warmth of the sun at the pole is identical to the warmth of the sun at the equator. It's only coming in at a low angle. But the net result is you can have sunlight all the time. Now, at that point, there were no photographs of the poles. There was no indication of whether there was a mountain at any of the poles you could get on. So my premise was you build a tower, which I loved calling the Lunar Polar Solar Power Tower. That you build a tower high enough to get up into the full-time sunlight. Indeed, and I said, if there's a mountaintop there, that's even better. And then a few years later, the first pictures from Clementine came back. And one reason the article's in the Explorers Club Journal is because it was an Explorers Club dinner where they were showing the first pictures from Clementine. And lo and behold, right in the middle of the South Pole is a mountain top that is almost permanently sunlight. So you put your tower on top of the mountain, and now you really do have full-time power. What's more important, and Peter and I disagree on this one, Peter wants to put everybody on the moon underground. No wonder you're going to need all these perks to get people to stay. You want to live in a hole for the rest of your life?
Have you seen the lunar base in the exhibit room?
Right, I don't want to live in it. But on the top of this mountain, you have full-time sunlight. You don't have to live in a hole.
You have radiation.
Well, now there's an interesting question. Ben Bova, I don't know if you've read Moonrise, but Ben Bova in his book Moonrise took whole paragraphs out of the Ad Astra article, described them as, it'd be nice enough to call the mountain Mount Wasser, which it doesn't have a name yet actually, so maybe I'll get lucky. But, and had much of the events take place on this mountaintop, which he called, from the title of the Ad Astra, the next Astra article, the most valuable real estate off Earth. In his book, the people suffer from a radiation problem. I mean, they're attacked by radiation while they're up there. I'm not at all sure that it's the same. First off, I don't know if there's any chance that you get some magnetic shielding at all, but more to the point is, I have a feeling that the radiation at that point is coming in at the same angle from the sun. And you should be able to shield simply by digging a hole of a low nature.
It's not the solar radiation.
It's
I mean,
cosmic.
solar radiation will kill you quick, but your galactic cosmic radiation, which is coming
It's
at you
coming
from all
all
directions
angles,
all the
all
time,
angles.
30 rads per year. And it's
Yeah.
cancer, you know, in a number of years. So
Uh,
that's your big one, and it's coming at you all the time.
And from all directions?
It's galactic, it's
Yeah.
all directions.
Well, I would think
Yeah,
you've got
if you don't mind, there's one thing I'd like to say, kind of join in here.
Please.
Dr. Paul Studis, who was the principal investigator,
Sure.
came and talked to our chapter. And one of the things that he mentioned about that spot up there that had 85% of the time sunlight was that, yes, in space, sunlight is full sunlight. And so you'll have to mount it vertically for your solar power. However, the ground itself is not perpendicular to the sun.
course.
It's like this. And so one of the other advantages of that spot is that the sunlight is at a low angle and it's hitting it and glancing off, and so it doesn't get up to 250 degrees.
Exactly.
It's a mild temperature environment.
So so thermal
So the-
control is much more easily handled.
Right, the rocks
And
aren't
frankly,
hot.
right, and if you get behind a rock from wherever the sun is at the moment, then you've got shadow. And so it should be possible to shelter, to thermal control your houses, if you will, by where you put your shades in your windows, in effect. In terms of, one of the things that Peter doesn't like is that the lighting obviously is coming in at a funny angle, which means you get long shadows. But of course, if you're building a huge power tower in the middle of your facility, which is permanently sunlighted, it can reflect down light, either with a mirror or by using some of that power to generate street lights, so that in fact you should be able to overcome your shadows. And in fact, this picture that Brian Sullivan is doing is, when we talk it through, he's got stuff on the top to make sure that the community down around the base of the tower is getting lighting from the top of the tower, even when it's in shadow from the sun. And incidentally, when you start talking about the tower, how big can you build a tower? Well, you have no wind loading. You don't have earthquakes of significant force. You should be able to, 1/6 gravity, you should be able to build the tallest tower anybody ever conceived of rather easily. My picture, frankly, was using lunar glass. Now, what you do get into questions of is, do you coat the outside of the tower with solar cells, in which case only one side is getting power at any given moment, or do you do some kind of internal structure where whichever angle the sun is coming in from, the internal structure, heated pipes of some sort of liquid? In other words, which way do you harness the power of the sun that's hitting the tower? And that's what Peter and I were discussing when we said, let's do a brainstorm. What do you do with this unlimited height tower? And by the way, do you build the tower with a new segment on top? Obviously, you're going to keep building it. It's going to start, the first people are going to land there probably in a ship ready to absorb power from itself. So before you get the tower going. Now you build the tower. Do you put segments on top each time? Or do you design a tower so that it's like one of these buildings that they build from the bottom up, where you raise itself up, put another segment underneath, which is thicker than the previous segment? In other words, you get an angle.
Build another tower?
Well, no, that's what you don't do, because each tower shades the next one. So while, yes, you would eventually be able to do something on the next mountain over, maybe, the truth is you'd really rather keep going up with your one tower, or out with your one tower, rather than building multiple towers. But how do you do that?
Too bad that we don't have a blackboard or whiteboard here.
Now, the business of the water coming in, let me just finish this one other thought. The water coming in, as I said in the article, I mentioned that maybe there would be frozen volatiles near the tower. Obviously now we know there are. So I'm picturing, Peter's talking about running hundreds of miles of piping across the lunar surface to transport water, if you're going to, or whatever, from the poles. In this scenario, you sit up on the top of the mountain with your big tower on the top of your mountain. You run hoses down the side of the mountain into the crater which is at the base of it.
About 2 miles down.
Okay, it's a lot better than 200. You run electric wires from your power tower down to the regolith down below, which you heat with the electricity from the power tower, which now vaporizes some of that water. Even if it's only 10-15% of the rock, you're going to get something when you heat it. You catch what comes out. You either pump it up or let it, if you heat it enough, it'll come up like steam, and it runs water right up to the top of your tower. And you've got a continuous flow of water without a whole lot of effort once you've got it started, because the power is free to heat the frozen regolith. The hose, once it's there, is going to keep carrying steam or water up to your tower. Now, that's water for drinking. I'm assuming water for fuel is going to be mined a significant distance away, because the water right at the base of the tower is too valuable to waste for that. So your industrial parks are going to be nearby, but not that nearby. Your residences are going to be on the top of the tower, where people don't have to live in darkness all the time. They get sunlight when they want to. And where water is available right at the bottom of the tower. So I'm assuming in Peter's lava tubes you will have man-tended factories or robotic factories turning out stuff, but the man who's tending it by teleoperation is living up on the top of the polar mountain. And he goes and visits the factory when he needs to, but the offices and the recreational facilities are on the mountain. Okay, argue.
The environment is too hostile for permanent.
Underground takes care of too many problems to even think. Yes, put a tower there. You got area underneath your tower that you could put a base right there if you dug it out.
Sink it into the mountain itself.
Sink it into the mountain.
Leave yourself.
Therefore,
a
you're
view.
still underground. You protect yourself from all the radiation, all
Fine.
dust.
But when you want to come, when you got time off and you want to see sunlight, You
can
come
pipe
up,
in the sunlight with
you
fiber
pop up to the
optics.
top of the mountain.
You get in your spacesuit, you do what your EVA,
Right,
wherever you
right.
do it.
I mean, have you ever lived for years in a hole in the ground? I mean, it's not pleasant. It's
You ever
not-
been to an
you
American
need
city?
an awful lot of perks
Huh?
for people to stay for a lifetime in a hole in the ground.
Well, hold on.
If you've seen that base that I built there in the exhibit hall, this was inspired by an underground home 30 miles from here. The usual underground home, the south face is exposed to catch the sunlight and passive solar. This home was totally underground. But the guy had, going through the ceiling, mirrored shafts with something at the top which would turn and follow the sun. This house was flooded with sunlight. It was 8 feet underground.
How
and
many
I've
people
never
can
been
go
in
live
a-
in those?
But
Are they
you
selling
can do
thousands
it.
of them?
Wait a minute. I've never been in a house which was so full of sunlight as this one.
Right, how many of them are
And
sold?
he had picture windows in every wall with
What's the
mirrors,
market?
mirrors on the angle.
But that's not the
How many
point,
cheap
because
throw up
right now-
houses you're gonna wanna live on,
You're
in the
gonna be able to
moon's no
generate
air?
enough electricity.
I'm sorry?
You won't generate enough electricity to heat very much dirt.
Oh, sure.
Sure you will.
Sure you will.
Yeah.
You
That's
would
not a
from-
problem.
Yeah, power
Your
generation is.
tower can be a mile high
But
and as wide as you want to
Solar
make it.
cells won't have enough current, would they?
I'm
Yeah.
sure
If you
they
have enough
would.
of them, they will.
Wouldn't even have to be
Electric
solar
heaters?
cells, it could be concentrators
current.
and boiling
It could be,
things.
While the sunlight is just as strong at the poles as somewhere else, further towards the equator, you can just lay out solar cells for square mile after square mile
Fine,
after square mile.
and it's not either or.
Where at the poles,
Yeah.
you do that,
You
and
do
one is
both.
shading the other.
But it's clearly true that your whole moon isn't going to run off of that one tower.
No.
But the base, the place where people are going to live, the headquarters facility will, and in your lava tubes around the equators will be factories, and they will generate their own power by doing it the way you're describing. You could even end up with a Criswell kind of situation where you're sending power back to Earth from other facilities. It's not like once you put the tower on one of the poles, that's the end. You can do it at the North Pole. There'll be another base at the South Pole. You're going to have plenty of manufacturing facilities where you have to put up with 14 days of darkness and 14 days of light, of too hot and too cold. And some people will live there for long periods of time, but it'll certainly be nice to come for vacation to where there's sunlight when you want it, not when the moon is giving it. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not going to want necessarily a view of the moon. What you're going to want is a view of the hydroponics section. I mean, that's the area where you're going to pay to live, is the place with the window out on the hydroponics section. And you're not going to want the radiation exposure of, being on the surface. And,
I mean, you might want a view of the Earth.
well, that'd be nice.
You also get almost full-time view of the Earth from here as well. You're in community, and if you want radio, one of the things, let's assume one of your customers for the colony is scientists who want to do radio astronomy. You go to the other side of the mountain from the Earth, and down that mountain, a few hundred feet down, you've got a mountain between you and all those radio sources on Earth. So in effect, you get the benefits of the far side of the moon without traveling very far. I mean, you can run wires to things that are effectively on the far side of the moon from the Earth and still run them back up to the transmitter that gets to the Earth. And incidentally, there's another mountain line of sight from this mountain. I'm too embarrassed to keep calling it Mount Wasser, so you'll forgive me. There is no other name for the mountain. But from Mount Wasser, there is another mountain a few miles away from which you have easy line of sight, and that one is far enough down into the front side of the moon that it's got full-time view of the Earth. So in effect, you've got a relay that gives you full-time contact with the Earth, and yet you're close enough to the far side that you can do all the benefits of far side stuff.
Anywhere on the edge, though, that's going to be true.
Anywhere on the edge, it's true, but only at the poles do you not have to deal with 14 days of darkness followed by 14 days of overwhelming heat. So you get the benefits of everything at the
Environmental
poles.
control is going to be the same
Constant
either way.
overwhelming heat.
No, you don't get constantly overwhelming heat, as it was pointed out, because of the angle.
You've got to have environmental control
Only
anyway.
only
rest
the
is
tower has constant
It's
heat.
a surface effect only, because there's no atmosphere, there's, you know, you go down 2 meters and you've got the same temperature all year round anywhere on the moon.
And fine, you
So
want to make,
the
hollow the mountain
temperature
out,
thing
make it
is
into an
overrated.
apartment building, that's fine. The bottom line is, when you get this craving for sunlight, which we all do, when you start getting what they call seasonal affective disorder, that comes from living in a hole,
Yeah. Well-
you just take an hour and you go up to the top and you got sunlight. You look over to where, oh, look at the beautiful sunlight.
We
You
managed
go back
to-
down in your hole
We
when it's time to go
managed
back
to
to
live here,
work.
we managed to live healthy lives here in Milwaukee, where sometimes you don't see the sun for 2 weeks at a time, unfortunately.
Does it ever depress you during those 2 weeks?
Oh, yeah, we
Try 20 years.
Ways
get
to
full
get around
lights,
that
or you
is
do
to
what the
have in the
Japanese
living
do.
space a
Right,
big place
exactly.
where the
Which I said
light,
before.
artificial
Fiber
light,
optic.
very
Yeah.
intense light treatment. and that's
No
the-
question, there are workarounds
Yeah, but
for
you
light
use
and
fiber
optics.
optics, you need a place
We're
to do
not
it, so
saying
it's-
that the only place you can live is on the pole. I'm just saying it's the best place to live.
And the artificial light that you would create, very intense, wouldn't have a lot of ultraviolet component to it to kind of fry you either. I'm not sure you want to be looking at the sun. up
Nobody
there.
has ever, I mean, they've done all this stuff for submariners and stuff like that, where they've tried to simulate the joys of sunlight, and it's worked to some extent, but it's certainly not anything anybody's going to fight for the privilege of doing, particularly when you can have sunlight whenever you want it.
Well, see, we can go outside and get sunlight anytime, so we don't do this in our homes. But where you can't do that, like on Moon or Mars, easily go outdoors unless you put on a spacesuit. I think we're going to want to have areas that are over-illuminated. A couple of years ago, I went through a facility in Madison called the Biotron, where Dr. Ted Tibbetts has been experimenting for NASA, growing plants, potatoes specifically. And we walked in this one room, and the light intensity was, you know, like high noon in the middle of Kansas in the middle of summer. You know, it was wow. And the psychological uplift was enormous. And so I think we're going to want to not just have reading like we're used to having, but we're going to want places that
But
are
how much better if you
over-illuminated.
could put a window in?
Oh, well, who said you can't put a window?
In a lava tube?
Who said I always want to be allowed to? I'm talking about.
I would dig a shaft up and put one of those mirror things down to get some sunlight in the
Space
lava.
station couple.
Put a screen and a camera outside. It's a lot safer.
Right, you know something, this building, they built this building and didn't allow the windows to open, because it saved money. You know something, they could have saved even more money by not putting windows in the first place. They could have put a camera in, and a tube, and mirrors. Why did they put those inefficient glass things on every damned room?
Because here, that's cheaper.
No,
It's-
no,
People
it's
want it,
because
right?
people want it.
That's cheap.
It's cheaper here. Also.
It's cheaper to put glass than to not put glass?
You put,
Yeah.
It's cheaper to put glass
That
than
many
to put
screens.
screens and
you put
cameras.
flat screens in each one of those things, you know how much money you just spent?
He's talking about,
But
it's
entirely
more
different
expensive
thing on
than
the moon.
brick. He's saying it's more expensive than brick. They could have just made it all brick.
Right, that's
We
the
agree
point.
that we need some sort of
The typical image of a lunar colony sounds to me like a penitentiary.
But it doesn't have to be that way, and there are numerous
But on the moon,
people that
it's
have
even, I mean, on the poles, it's even easier.
You're-
But now what I need help on is designing the power tower. How should the power tower be covered in solar cells? Or should it be a passive thing with pipes, and how do you build it?
I think it ought to be like a big observatory that's on a track that kind of rotates around like
Right,
this.
do you build something that rotates and follow the sun?
Yeah, here's a straw man suggestion, just to start the thing off. I don't know what you think. From the top side, it looks like that. So it's flat, you know, very.
The tower.
The tower. Front end, you make it like that. Then when you need to add more, you push it up and you add like that.
Mhm. Built of
And
solar glass?
and you rotate that to follow.
No, what, do you rotate it? I mean, do you build
Yeah,
something
well,
that has to rotate and follow the sun? Or do you build something that does, that just sits there and lets
You
the
need a-
sun,
you
and then
need
works
a-
from all directions?
You need a lot less elements if the same elements are always facing the
No
sun.
question.
But
need a
you
lot
you
less
need a
elements.
stronger structure if you're gonna add dynamic loading.
What
Okay,
you
but
need
if
to
there's
do
no
is-
wind,
So if you-
there's
More
no,
than
no,
have
but
the
if it's
whole
moving,
thing
it's a
turn.
dynamic load.
Have just,
Yeah.
you need a top turn.
Well, no, because you want to collect solar power as far up and down as you possibly can, because
Yeah.
you're limited by area.
But then you can, I mean, anything to add. is
Right, that's, I
still-
mean, that's one of the options, is to build it
I
a
don't like the
passive
idea
thing
of
covered with
turning.
solar cells all over. Maybe solar cells are cheaper than the motor to turn this
That was
big
just a
thing.
suggestion.
No, it's a good one. I mean, that's why I'm asking the question. I don't know the answer to this.
The motor.
Why
you
use
the same-
solar cell? Why not use it as a solar concentrator and use the heat to melt your water directly?
How would you do that?
And
You'll build a
generate
glass
electric-
tower with pipes?
Generate your electricity by Stirling engine or methods like that.
Are you talking about a dish, or are you talking, I mean, how would you build something like that, concentrated?
You can use lightweight concentrators to reflect sun in and have most of the surface that carries your heating liquid or fluid. Painted black, it's going to absorb everything.
Yeah, you're gonna, if you're talking about reflecting it back down to the ground?
So you're trying to heat a liquid.
Yeah.
Burn through black pipes and
Daryl Kriebel,
It's
he's
called
out
steam
in
power.
Virginia,
Yeah,
I believe,
I
and
agree. Your water
he's
is
been running for the
200
past year or two,
Fahrenheit.
solar
You get
power
7 heat steam,
working
7
group.
solar rays,
That is,
so
they've
nothing
been
to
addressing
do
all these
with
issues, and he
garbage
was at
can,
Space
sunlight
98 in
and garbage
Albuquerque.
you can underground.
And
You've got all the
he's, I mean,
categories.
he has been addressing these exact issues, and his
For a polar solar power tower?
for
For a lunar polar solar tower?
maybe not a tower, but
But the tower is the
lunar
key
polar
thing.
solar power.
Right. I mean, the tower is what
The
can,
elements would be the same. It's just the array of the tower.
well, no,
They're talking about parallel concentrators, is what they're called. They're like a big trough, like this, with a pipe in the middle, and there's a parabolic mirror trough.
so your tower would be covered by pipes around the
I'm
side?
saying that you don't have to have solar cells, they can be power concentrators, and then the fluid inside the focal pipe is heated.
Does anybody know which is more efficient, heating a pipe full of fluid, or covering it with solar cells?
Oh,
And which is easier to, yeah, right, because this is what, I take it this is what you're talking about? That this would be a cross-section of the tower with pipes?
Unless you made a flat one with a series of those that you followed the sun with.
But is that more, and can you build that out of solar, out of lunar materials? I mean, obviously, one of the constraints is that you want to be able to build the tower out of what you find there.
You can build a factory.
How long do solar cells
We could do this
last?
somewhere else, we didn't have the water.
Well,
Right.
I don't know, but they're gonna be bombarded.
As Peter's
by
saying, here you have
so you
water
degradation
running
of
the pipe.
surface
And do you
from
run water?
impact.
Or do you run,
I don't
is there
know.
something else that melts at a higher temperature on the moon that you could use?
So they've got to
Sodium or
produce
something?
quite a high current.
Potentially.
Oh, yeah,
there's
there's been great advancements.
There's a sodium potassium alloy, NAC, which is liquid at room temperatures, but it's very nasty stuff.
So you probably wouldn't want it, because sooner or later, you're gonna have a meteorite hit it and it'll leak all over your base.
Sooner rather than later.
Right.
Probably.
There's lots of water up there, we can use water.
So if we use water, and then you boil it up the tower, and you bring it back down to run turbines down below.
For one thing, remember, probably, if there's going to be more than one settlement around, this place is just going to be the water factory for the other places where eventually pipeline will get.
I'm picturing this,
They're gonna have
this
lots of
mountain
water.
at the pole not as a manufacturer. I'm picturing this as New York, not Detroit. The pole is where the headquarters and the vacation facilities are and that sort of thing. The factories, you move away from that. So where the real mining goes on is maybe a hopper trip away from the base.
Well, eventually, there can't be just one settlement on the moon.
No,
There
certainly
can't
not.
be just two, like one at the North Pole and one at the South
Oh,
Pole.
of course not.
there are gonna be other places for
But you gotta
some
start
reason.
somewhere.
But there's gonna be
And
headquarters.
They're gonna need water, they're gonna need a railroad or pipeline.
Where is David Trunk? Where is he? Because he's the man with
What pipeline?
with pictures, yeah. The
Well,
Lunar Railroad system based around a South Pole base. I mean, that's what he was presenting today, and that's what he presented in Space
The
98.
thing I had suggested, so that people don't misunderstand, when I talked about pipelines, I wasn't talking about piping liquid water. I was talking about using the available sunlight to take the water, but keep in mind that we're not just gonna find water ice there, we're gonna find carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide ices mixed in with it.
Methane maybe.
So what you do is you produce methane and ship the methane, which can be combined with oxygen anywhere. And you recover the energy you use to produce the methane by, on the other end, when you add the oxygen back in and produce carbon dioxide and water. And then you don't have any problem with leaks or pressure or temperature or anything if you're shipping methane,
Why not?
as compared to water.
But then how do these facilities?
Pipeline man right here. All the companies do it all the time. High pressure methane, you know, is something you can move tremendous quantities of methane down a pipeline. Tremendous.
The trick is to get
tonnage
height
of
up.
it.
And you don't have to worry about explosions because there's no oxygen.
And the point is that this methane is not going to liquefy, or it won't be too hot or too
But
cold. or
what do you
can heat it
build the
up.
pipes out? What do you make the pipes out of?
Lunar materials, all that,
Iron, titanium, aluminum,
all that.
all the stuff that's there.
All those little meteorites, those pieces of iron nickel meteorites are just laying there. It's a certain small
So
percentage,
you
like
need
1%.
one hell of a big factory to turn out hundreds of miles of piping.
Heck yeah.
And of course, it's going up and down over those
Right.
mountains and craters.
You gotta have those factories anyway to build your building materials for the base itself.
Or for your tower.
And if you,
Or
well,
for
I don't know.
the tower, yeah.
Get down to
And what do you
keeping
build the
an
tower
A.
out of? I mean, I've been picturing lunar
What do you have
glass.
there? What is sitting there on the ground?
You build rocks, use rock. Why not make it lunar glass?
So you can make pipes of that too.
Yeah.
Why not?
Let me
You
tell you
can
what's
make
probably
fiberglass.
more.
And by the way,
You
do
make
it,
it.
once you've got this humongous tower, if, let us say, you go for the coating it with solar cells route, or even if you put pipes around it, do you use the inside of the tower for living quarters? Do you use the inside of the tower for anything?
No.
No,
Uh,
why?
Outside for solar cells, the inside for water pipes.
Oh, yeah, actually, that's not a bad idea. So
Okay.
how much, so solar cells would transmit the heat into,
No, the solar cells themselves would pull out the frequencies that they use and pass on the rest of it, which would then be used to heat the water.
that's an extremely good idea.
If you take a look at it, it's actually a similar process has been done at TGI Fridays, where they run the entire restaurant off of these two types of electricity, providing the hot water that they need from that and the electricity they need from the solar cells. This is used to power the place and provide their hot water. And that's their roof. They designed it that way so they didn't have to add it to the roof. They only did one, but they did it as an experimental project. I read about it about 6 months ago. And they are getting 75% of the power they need directly off their roof.
So then you can build a passive tower, you don't have to turn the damn thing to follow the sun,
Right.
but you get the benefits of both the light waves on the solar cells and the heat that passes through them
Right.
heats your piped water.
And how practical that would necessarily be on the moon?
Why not?
Probably more so.
Probably more
Well,
so.
the problem on the moon is that getting rid of the heat, not making it.
Yeah.
Well, not in the case of the tower, you don't care how
Well,
hot
no,
the tower
but
gets.
in terms of a base, the problem you have is getting rid of excess heat, not.
Yeah, the
so-
crater
No,
down
you're
there
thinking of an
minus
equatorial
300
base.
degrees.
Well, no,
No.
even if you have a sealed area with humans in it, getting rid of the heat will be a problem.
We get a
But here
tremendous
you've
heat
got
sink.
an
That's what
area that's a
thermocouples are for.
permanent shadow that you could do heat pipes or something
Yeah.
with, and that you could cool it by the fact that you've got permanent shadow. You could warm it by the fact that you've got permanent
Yeah, I
sun.
guess.
stuff like
I'm
that.
assuming
Because-
habitations will now need only good heat pumps to move the heat from whichever side is currently in the sun to whichever side is currently in the shadow.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all you need to keep temperature controls
And by using
accurate.
thermocouples for that, you're actually generating additional electricity by moving that heat.
So each residence,
Work
if it's
for,
above
Apollo.
the surface, becomes an electric generator itself as well.
Can't be above the surface.
Let me ask you,
No,
can
he
the
can be above the
hotel
surface,
be above the
not
surface?
me.
You were saying the radiation would get you after, the background radiation
What you
would
want-
get you after how long?
What you want to put above the surface is places for vacation, restaurants where people go to eat.
With lots of
Things like this, but not where they spend
So
the
the
bulk of their time.
the tourist hotels
That's different.
are on the surface.
Yeah, those people are
For
standard.
reference, on Earth, radiation workers are by OSHA allowed to be exposed to 5 rads per year. And on the moon, the surface radiation from galactic cosmic radiation is 30 rads per year. So you don't want to live there all the time, but you can go up whenever you want. But you definitely, and it's like living in a basement that's flooded with radon gas. You don't, and I don't know the exact amount of time it would take for you to generate cancer, but it's just like a radiation worker here on Earth in a nuclear power plant. You don't want to expose them to that risk.
And you are
Or painting your
completely
walls
sure
with
that the
radium.
radiation flux is identical at the equators and poles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's galactic.
Right.
Yeah.
The universe is all around us. It is not in the solar ecliptic plane.
Right, solar, I mean, the moonrise, if you've read Moonrise, the issue was a solar flare. Now,
And
would a
solar
solar
flare
flare
is dangerous,
at the
but it's a
moon, at the
temporary
poles,
event.
would that not come from the sun?
Right. Yes, that would.
But it's not
So now a
necessarily
solar
the sun.
flare could be blocked by just getting behind a boulder and doing that. And if
But
you're
it's-
behind the boulder and the sun is
Some of
over
it.
there, you're shielded from a solar flare.
I believe,
Some
though,
of
that eventually the radiation from a solar flare comes from every direction. I believe that's what Buzz said last time I asked him about this.
There's a certain scale.
Well,
I've got
they're
a-
scattered, there is scattered.
Scatter from what? There's no atmosphere to scatter you.
There are other
So what are you
mountains.
scattering from?
Other
You don't
mountainsides.
get much.
There is no other mountaintop around you.
The main problem with the radiation they're talking about is cosmic radiation, which are heavy nuclei, not helium or not hydrogen, but things like iron nuclei that are going almost the speed of light. Those are the super heavy cosmic rays. And they hit our upper atmosphere now, and they cascade into a shower of particles by the time they get down here.
Aurora Borealis.
You don't get hit with one iron nuclei zipping through your body. You get hit with a bunch of mesons and stuff like that, which is a lot more benign. So what they're talking about is when some of the astronauts occasionally reported a flash of light in their eyes when they had the lights off and it's supposed to be dark, it's one of those super heavy nuclei going through their eyeball, generating radiation, so that's the kind of stuff you gotta go.
But would a boulder stop that?
No,
Sure.
no,
No,
not at
no.
all.
Boulder
But
would
that's
stop it.
that's the kind of thing that you're worried about, because the heavy nuclei that for example, destroy brain cells, and
Yeah.
the Apollo astronauts, from the cosmic radiation from supernovas in galaxy on the other side of the universe, they suffered a significant loss in the number of brain cells that they have that are active. But with regards to the amount of cancer, for 1 rad of instantaneous exposure, as a result of chromosomal damage and a result of free radicals, you get 1 to 2 cases of mostly leukemia per year per million people that get exposed. So 30 rems a year is not really a big problem, even though the regulatory limit is 5 rads a year, or 5 rems. They're equivalent units. That's a very low number, and 30 rems a year is below the level that your body can repair itself using natural repair mechanisms, repair its cells, repair damage from free radicals. You can use all sorts of drugs like antioxidants and, I've got some transparencies from the talk I never got to, but there's a lot of stuff you can do, including changing the atmospheric composition, putting more nitrogen, filler gases like that, having as little oxygen as you can. That further reduces the amount of free radicals that you have that
And where do
damage
you
your
take the
tissue.
shield from this stuff? Is the spacesuit that's, I mean, obviously, even on the poles, when you go up to see the sunlight, you're not out there in your bare skin. You've got a space station or you got a spacesuit or a window between you.
A little shielding is worse than none.
That's
A little shielding is worse than none, because a little shielding is what causes all those.
In the case of the big heavy ions, or are we
Yes.
talking about?
Yes.
Big heavy ion.
Yeah, because basically
Because
it's turning into more
what happens
radiation.
But what happens is it comes and it hits the surface of something, and then it cascades. It interacts with things, and it ionizes other particles around there, which ionize other particles, and the result is you get your Dmax dose is some distance through the material. You actually get a higher dose if there's just a little thing.
But
because
is a
you have to build up
spacesuit
the second
protection or a harm?
If you can't have 2 meters, it's better
It keeps
than
you
none.
alive.
It's actually more complex than just it hits the first layer of atoms and then it turns
Yeah.
into a big cascade and irradiates you to death. It's actually there come heavy nuclei which create the cascades mostly. They're very penetrating, and you have to have a substantial amount of shielding. It's more like if you have a foot of shielding or a number in that ballpark, then that is worse than having an inch of shielding. But if you have a few meters of shielding, then that is adequate to stop the backscatter and the brainstorming radiation. But having a spacesuit on, for example, that stops almost all of the radiation. Having just a few grams per square centimeter of shielding. It's when you get substantially more than that without having very large amounts, like a few meters, that you start getting into backscatter problems that actually defeats the purpose.
So if you're on the surface of the pole in a spacesuit,
Yeah.
or behind a window.
A hard suit preferably.
Right.
Or
Then that's going to be acceptable until you actually get into a solar storm, I take it?
Sure, sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
So
it's been
so the
done.
tourists,
They were there, they did
so the
it.
tourists can go out for EVA whenever they get there. It's not like on the equator where if they happen to be at high noon or midnight, which is a week long in each case, tough, you know, wrong time, you come back next year. Whenever you get there, you can go for an EVA, you can look out at the Earth, you can look out at the sun. As somebody pointed out, you can take pictures of your wife with the Earth right behind her, because it's always down on the horizon. It's not overhead.
The problem isn't for the tourists, it's for the staff.
Yeah.
To stay there.
So the staff spends their working hours down in a hole, and they come up when they need some sunlight on their day off, and the rest of the time they spend down in the hole. This is a whole lot better than living at the equator, where if your day off happens to be at midnight, forget it. You don't get to see any sun at all.
Well, nobody's gonna do that unless they wanted to torture somebody. I mean,
Yeah.
you would not do that.
You wouldn't what, give them a day off?
Give them a day off in the middle of the night.
Well, but the middle of the night is a week
It's
long.
14, yeah.
And high noon is no better. So you get a day off every month?
No, it isn't.
But there's an
And everybody wants a day off the same day. I mean, the whole base gets a day off at sunrise and sunset, and for the rest of the time, they live in a hole. I think they'd rather live on the pole. Maybe I'm wrong.
They're up all night.
There's an aspect that everybody seems to be overlooking, which is that the major thing that protects us from radiation here on Earth is our magnetic field, that and our atmosphere. All right? If you're generating electricity under these circumstances, in all probability, you're going to have a hell of a lot of electricity that's left over. Why not create a magnetic field to divert a lot of this radiation over the base?
You
From
make
the top,
a ring with
sitting on the top of the
superconducting
tower
magnet.
could be whatever you're using
Yeah.
to generate a, in other words, the tower itself could actually generate some kind of field protection for the people who are living in its base?
Basically a magnetic grid over the base that was designed so that actually you could use superconductors as an insulator because they won't allow a magnetic field to pass through them, and have the magnetic field above it. And
you've got all the cold you need for your superconductors.
yeah,
That would protect you from the solar radiation, but not from those super heavy cosmic ray nuclei. Those things are not going to be bent by any magnetic field you're going to be able to generate.
And you've
I'm not economic.
tell that to a cyclotron.
around the
But I mean,
people
but
I'm
you're-
talking about.
that's
You don't want people inside a cyclotron. You don't want
The
people
magnetic
in a
field would not be
magnetic.
penetrating the base at all if you've got a magnetic shield.
If
between
you've got
the
a
base
tower a
and-
mile high, and up on the
Yeah.
top of it, it's generating one whiz-bang magnetic field, you're a mile away from the people who are living at the bottom of the tower. But they're still getting shielding from the magnetic field that you're generating up at the top, right? Question mark?
Depends how strong it is.
Yeah.
Like I say, even a cyclotron is not going to bend a super heavy nuclei going near the speed of light. Those super cosmic rays that I'm talking
What
about,
kind are you
they wouldn't be
thinking of?
bending very much in a magnetic field.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what
I'm
what,
thinking
what,
of.
what element are you thinking
I'm
of?
talking about iron.
Well, my dad bashes gold into gold and lead into lead.
All the-
I'm talking
Yeah.
about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
most common nuclear
No,
ash that
I'm
there
talking what,
is.
I'm talking what goes on now in cyclotrons. They bash
right.
gold into gold. That's what my dad does for a living.
We
So
can
that's
do
really
this.
been
This
our-
technology is
Densities
there.
are so high, though.
Yeah, we're talking about a lot of power to do that.
Yeah.
We're talking about a lot of leftover power.
We want to save that.
No.
Power is
Yeah,
gold
but they
in
said you
space.
said they're not doing
Power
that.
is
That's
gold
not
in
true.
space.
There is no way to save
Don't
that
waste
power.
it.
That 85%
Yes, there
applies
is.
to the ground.
There's no use for it.
Let's clarify something. Peter and I are talking about something that's significant. That 85% of the time sunlight, they're talking about on the ground of this mountain.
Not necessarily.
You put a mile-high tower on top of a mountain that already got 85% of the sunlight. You've got sunlight 100% of the time on the tower.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about 85% of the time sunlight. We're talking about 100% of the time sunlight
It's
on the
still-
tower.
It's still a very unique, narrow, singular place that
Well, there's two
you
of them.
can't, well, two, and it still doesn't allow you a lot of growth.
Well, no, but.
What I'm talking about is you build the moon that's above the base.
Right, this,
with
First, one of the first power stations.
The
yeah,
question
this
is,
and it probably will remain the main tourist base
I want to hear
and the main headquarters and recreational area. What?
the question is, with regards to power generation, is it is it less than twice as expensive to put photovoltaics, gigawatts worth of them, at the top of this mile-high tower, even if it's on the moon, no wind and whatever, or is it cheaper to have the same size both on the other side of the moon? And I'm very skeptical about that, for one thing. The second thing is you have higher delta V. The third thing is that you have you don't have lava tubes. The fourth thing is that you don't have the same sort of diversity of resources that you have at a coastal Mare highland terrain. The South Pole it's not typically thought through well enough as a landing site.
On beachfront property.
The South Pole is lava tube rich?
No.
We
The
don't
lava
know.
tubes are
There's
found in the
boundaries.
high.
We don't
they're found in the
actually
Mare.
We don't know who's been there.
Not in the highlands.
As I say, my picture, the image I have, and I obviously could be totally wrong, and this is why makes an interesting brain session. I mean, I'm happy to be proven wrong. But the image I have is, this is the headquarters base, this is where people are, but that industry is in the lava tubes on your mare, that the factories, that the mines, the strip mines, which are unsightly, are not going to be where you want to put the tourists anyway. So your industries, your factories, most of which will be either robotic or man-tended. I mean, you're not really going to use, it's hard to get a whole lot of a vast factory workforce on the moon. As much as possible is going to be robotic or man-tended, tele-operated. So the tele-operator can be at one place. The factory is going to be indeed in the lava tubes, in the mare. Even the mining of high volume water for export or whatever is not going to be around the mountain. It's going to be out of sight. It's going to be where the tourists don't get, oh, look at that mess,
And it'll be dark.
Say again?
And it will be dark. The ice mine will be dark.
Right. Yeah.
Well, one of the important things is, as Peter has said in an article in the Moon Miner's Manifesto, it's just slightly enriched over the rest of the hydrogen implanted in the regolith. I mean, where you're going to be getting your hydrogen is where you're going to be doing the strip mining, and that's going to be at Angus Bay. That's not going to be at the South Pole, because you're going to be excavating vast quantities of regolith anyway to get the creep and rare earth elements and potassium and all these nifty things.
Well, we absolutely
so what's the point of having
But we're not
a
talking
base
about
if you're
what,
not getting your
but as
hydrogen?
Peter also points out, we're not talking about the moon base.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
There's going to
of
be
course.
multiple moon bases for different purposes.
Well-
You don't put, the headquarters of U.S. Steel are not in an iron mine.
But it is where...
Or next to an iron
But
mine.
it is where potassium and phosphorus can be had cheaply, and that is not
The
in the South
headquarters
Pole
of
either,
the
because it's not
companies
there.
that
You don't put
mine
people
things
there.
are not in the mine.
Okay.
They aren't even next to the mine.
Moving stuff
Yes,
1,000 kilometers across a very rugged planetary surface at the South Pole, it's very rugged at least. That's not a trivial proposition for moving enough
When you
phosphorus
start-
to support.
when you
Talking
start-
about moving product, that U.S. Steel does not take its iron ore and bring it to the headquarters.
About as tourists, right?
I'm
We're
sorry?
talking about tourists, right?
Tourists, headquarters,
Okay.
the executives.
Tourist is going to land where it is the cheapest to land.
No. Of course not. It's cheap.
Well, you're going to sit there and spend extra money.
You're going to go where
You
it's
want to
worth
see where it
seeing
looks
something.
nice.
Right.
You're going to
you can see
go
where it's
somewhere the hotel
cheap.
is. You don't take tourists to the factories.
No,
You don't take
you
factories
don't-
to the mines. You take it
them
to
to
the
the
site spot.
city.
You
The
put a
city's
city
built around
right on the
labor.
on the.
Wait,
Well,
okay.
the feature
Well,
is-
forgive me, which of the major cities of the world are built around mines? I can think of
Originally,
one.
You're not gonna put a mine there.
Originally,
Johannesburg.
That's what I'm saying.
Whenever-
I can, you got it. The one and only city in the whole world that's built around mines is Johannesburg.
actually, in expansion of civilization, every initial move was to where the resources were that you needed. That's why so many cities are on rivers to this day. We don't use those the same way anymore, but that's why they're there. That's why so many towns were built where the railroads were.
No, the railroads were built to where the towers, to the towns were.
And vice versa,
the
actually,
tour,
more
and
towns
the
were built
cities.
where the railroads were than the other way around. And the fact of the matter is that you've got to put your first city where the resources are. But I thought that the premise of this discussion was we're assuming we're going to go for the South Pole, whether it's a good idea or not.
I said, let's Alan have his hotel there and build places for executives to live. And we'll do that elsewhere on the moon and let them vote
Yeah.
with their feet.
Seriously, where are the headquarters of the major mining companies? Are they in fact at the mines? Where is the headquarters of U.S. Steel?
Can I
Where
ask
was
you a
it?
question about
When
this
I was
concept?
shooting Meg, or-
What happens if there is a major damage caused to the to the tower? Do you have a backup system?
What kind of major damage are you talking about?
Ship runs into it, hits
Meteor?
a meteor, something like that. What happens if it gets damaged? That's my problem with those concepts. It's everything
million
is
AA
based-
batteries.
Everything is based on the tower. If the tower gets damaged, everybody dies.
Well, if the tower gets damaged, you seriously have a problem, with no question about it. You damn well better build the tower big enough and strong enough that it can
It's better
sustain.
to disperse your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, it's better to have some backup system.
Yeah.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, that's what we need off the planet.
I mean, I guess the answer is maybe you evacuate some people to the factories in that situation. I
If
mean,
you have
you know, look, if you're in a lava tube and it springs a humongous leak because a ship cracked open a huge
We got
hole,
15
you got a
minutes
problem
before
too.
it strikes everybody 1,300 kilometers north.
Funny. But is this not true about any lunar facility? Whatever you've got, if it's seriously damaged, the people in it have a problem.
But you're
But if it's
sitting
spread
here,
out, if
here's
it's
this
spread out,
large
then
tower,
there's-
one single large tower, you have a ship full of tourists that bashes into it and seriously damages it, your power supply is gone. Without power on the moon, you're
No, wait.
dead.
Damaged
Quick.
is one thing. Knocked over is a big
Well, damage, if you
Damage, I mean, you know,
if you damage
realistically,
to
if you
break the
cover
wa-
something in solar power cells and something runs into it and knocks off 5% of the solar cells,
If you did-
you aren't really instantly dead.
all you really need to do is cut the tower, or cut the cables to the top. If you cut them, if you
Well,
cut
clearly
the
then you
serrations-
don't build it around one cable to the top.
Well, what if you take?
I'm sorry, but if you've got one water pipe that gets busted, the explosive decompression will destroy the whole thing.
Obviously,
Or
your design
can.
is not going to
Yeah.
be that vulnerable. I mean, yes, that's the part of the point of here, is we clearly need to design scenarios that aren't one point vulnerable and we're all
But that
dead.
is one
Which
point
is-
vulnerable.
No,
You have
it isn't.
The tower,
Yeah, it
if the
is.
tower
It
is
is
destroyed,
fairly
you're
close.
dead.
The tower is destroyed, you're dead. But a ship hitting a tower that's well-built isn't going to knock it over. You know, an airplane crashed into the Empire State Building. It didn't fall over. The Arabs set off the bombs under the World Trade Center. It didn't fall over.
But if they put them in the right place, it would
So
have.
if in fact somebody manages, there's no question that if somebody manages to knock over the tower, it's in big problem. But if you're in a lava tube and somebody blows a 600-yard wide hole in the side of
That's
it,
a lot
you're
harder
equally
to do.
dead.
That's a lot
Why do you have
harder to
to
do.
have one tower?
Because two towers shade each other.
No, so far.
Only at one.
So you could, in theory, ultimately build more towers, but you get significantly less value out of the second tower, because at 2 times a month, one of the towers is shaded by the other.
But why not have a whole cylinder of towers and then just put up with having to have more photovoltaic?
Well, yes, I mean, maybe that is, and maybe that is the answer. Maybe that's the answer to the one-point vulnerability, is that you accept towers that will shade each other.
But regardless, with regards to the dichotomy between everybody living somewhere and everybody mining somewhere, I don't think that's a safe distinction to make, because the transportation infrastructure is not going to be there on the moon, and
And still, it'd be one hell of a commute.
yeah. but the thing is that the mining infrastructure is going to come where the tourism comes. Tourism is the industry that has the kind of profit margins and the kind of appeal and the kind of known, understood market that will be able to draw capital to create the mining infrastructure that you need for everything else to be able to service this lunar space. Perhaps that's one scenario, but in this scenario, you have to have the mine.
These are also strip mines?
In this, no, strip, oh, come on.
No strip mines.
The moon is a big sandbox. I mean,
No strip
you
mines.
can drive a stake into a sandbox without spoiling the ants.
To be honest
We
with
don't
you,
have
the tourists
concentrated
might want to go
forest
see the strip mine because it's going to be one of the different places on the moon.
But the strip mine will be there to service the
Peter's saying there is no strip mines on the moon. Am I wrong, or are all those pictures of the shovels being pulled across the moon, pulling in regular,
No.
any different from a strip mine?
No, they're taking up the regolith, heating it, extracting it, and dumping it right back. where it
Right,
is.
that's what strip mines do.
Well,
They strip off the surface, they heat it, they extract what they want, and they dump back
The
that.
strip mine destroys the topsoil and environment.
But there's no, we grant that there's no topsoil on the moon, but the net result is not going to be what you want to spend $100,000 or more to take 2 weeks to come to the Earth to go look at.
After we strip
Actually,
mine it,
yes.
we'll cover it over and make artificial craters there, so it looks the same.
Fine, and then you can use it as a tourist. But clearly, meanwhile, your tourist facility and your strip mine are not the same location.
Actually, to tell the honest truth, when you first get there, yes, those strip mines are going to be a tourist attraction because people are going to want to see the
See what people are
manufacturing.
doing on the moon.
But they're trivial
So
sizes.
now you have a day excursion to take from your hotel.
Well, that's great, but all the windows on the other side.
The apparatus that's going to do this is going to skip any sizable crater. The only things that they're going to strip mine over, if you will, are small things. And unless you're right on top of them, you can't see them anyway. So from any distant perspective, you're not going to be able to tell the difference, except maybe an albedo difference. Right. You're not going to be able to tell it's been mined or not mined until you get close enough to see, in this area, there's no small craters.
I'd like to say maybe we should just, everybody just take a step back. I don't think there's too much point in becoming strident over something that's so very conceptual at this point. I mean, arguing over details is fun, it's true, but there's really no point. But I think what mainly, but the point, the conclusion that needs to come out of this is there are a lot of safety issues involved in this hostile environment that I don't think you've really thought about. There are a lot of merits to your choice of location, and I think that you take that concept, your choice of location, and you put it into the context of the safety issues, and I think a lot of the arguments will fall out in the wash.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, what you
Let me
need
put
to
it
do
this
is
way.
list all the
You're
options.
absolutely right, there's an awful lot that hasn't been thought about, which is why this session. I mean, the reason for having this session is to raise all of these questions, or some of the questions that haven't been thought about.
Right.
And frankly, we haven't even begun to think about all of the things here.
I don't think
Also,
there should
I'd
be
like to say that
discussion.
there have been a lot of people who have given a lot of thought to exactly these details, and the papers are out there.
Yeah.
Papers on lunar polar towers?
Papers on site selection and reasons for site selection, papers on human factors issues in establishing permanent habitation areas and tourism areas, papers on safety issues with regard to any human operated. So I think that hashing it out here is a lot of fun. But there's a lot of background research out there that we can all delve into.
In fact, there's a lot of papers right in the Artemis data.
None of us, they're not going to hire any of us to actually build the base, you know.
That's
I
just
have
not
bad
paying
news for
any-
you.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, speak for yourself. They're not paying
Not-
anybody,
it's not
that's why
this
they're
way.
not going to hire anybody.
I'm sorry?
They're not paying anybody for this work, that's why they're not going to
Well,
hire
that's part.
anybody.
At this point.
But on the other hand, it makes
Until we
an
make it
interesting
a
subject,
job.
and frankly, I'm hoping that people will go home from this and play with the idea further, and tomorrow or next week, somebody's going to go, ooh, nobody thought about that one. And
You know, there are.
suddenly, somebody will have.
There's a certain small segment of the tourism now where people go on working vacations. They go on architecture.
So you're going to pay $500,000 to go dig to rob a regular one.
And the cheapest way to go to the moon may be to go to work for a while.
Well, sure. By the way, are we picturing lunar mines as having warm human bodies with shovels and picks,
No.
digging?
Well, they've got to repair the machinery, though. That's the whole point of
Sure,
putting people there.
right. You're going to have to repair the machinery.
But you
You're going to have to
maybe-
direct the machinery. Now, you can direct, you're not going to be sitting on the machinery to direct it, you're going to be teleoperating it anyway, right?
In which case, you might as well be on Earth.
No, because Earth is too far away.
And you're going to be planning.
You might want to be at where the bar is when you've got time off. You might want to be where the girls are when you've got time off. But when you're working, you're going to want to be and in fact, since there are going to be multiple factories and multiple mines, if you're permanently stuck at your factory, you're a long distance away from the next factory. Whereas if all the teleoperators are located in one or two places, even though they're operating mines scattered around, and when they have to, they go fix the machinery.
I have a feeling it'll be cheaper to train people to put up with a 3-second delay and the lower productivity than to send people to the moon to do teleoperation a few kilometers away.
I don't think they'll let operations shut down for weeks while we move somebody up there. I think the operators and the maintainers are going to be centrally located where they can get out and get things back in operation.
Yes,
I think if you're a teleoperator, it doesn't matter where you are.
But we're going to break because we got to get to the
He's been dying to ask one question.
The assumption here is that the poles are privileged positions on the moon, and the assumption is that collecting solar power is a major factor. I suspect there may be other things that might be more important about those locations. For example, a 24-hour solar observatory to study the surface of the sun because of its effect on conditions on the Earth, etc. I mean, there might be other things besides solar power entirely that are located at the poles that would change this whole scenario.
To be honest with you, I think the biggest factor is the human factor. Peter and I disagree with this. I think the fact of being able to generate power is terribly important. The availability of water is terribly important. The fact that you can shield from Earth without going very far is terribly important. But in the long run, I think the human factor, the consequence of
putting up with Earth shine?
of having sunlight available.
Earth light is better than sunlight.
Well, why do you say that?
Because it's not blinding. Earth will
How much
Earth
light would you
shine is
have?
better than sunlight.
No,
All the
this is not
astronauts
critical.
said it was the Earth shine is substantial and enough to work with. It's
can
like
read a
2 orders of
newspaper.
magnitude brighter than
You can read
moonlight.
a newspaper, I think. I heard that.
But there are times that you have a crescent Earth or a
Yeah,
new
it's
Earth.
not always a full.
So it's not always that bright.
Right, you don't get full-time earth shine. And don't forget, at the poles, you do get you get full-time earth shine as well as full-time sunshine. So you get the benefit of all of the answer is you get, at the poles, you get the benefit of all of these factors. And it doesn't, I mean, it's not necessary to predict.
But you're
the bad.
missing a heck of a lot of stuff. Like
what?
what's the problem? Like resources.
Well, I think what
Resources, that's the whole purpose of going to the moon. Resources. Resources, minerals.
I don't,
And-
I don't think that's all.
And you can't build a rail gun in the middle of mountains. That's one thing.
You know, talk about your safety factors, having your tourists living right next to your railgun might not be the idea. Surface safety factor. I'm gonna go take a boat ride if anybody, but it's been fun. And if anybody gets any further thoughts, I'm at awasser@MCI Mail. awasser@mci.mail.com. So, and pointing out how wrong I am is gratefully received.